Hey everyone, today I'll be reporting on Strength and Respectability, Black Women's Negotiation of Racialized Gender Ideals and the Role of Daughter-Father Relationships by Maria S. Johnson and Précis by me. So in her introduction, Maria talks a lot about the reasoning behind why she chose to conduct this study. And the reason was because there's a lot of research on how Black girls are socialized by their mothers, but there's not a lot of research on how they're socialized by their fathers. So she points out that Black femininity is determined by strength and respectability, which are contradictory in nature because strength has more to do with independence and resilience, while respectability has more to do with submissiveness, domesticity, and purity. To do this, Maria conducts a study for qualitative data from around 79 interviews, which she conducts from 40 young Black women who are in college. And so within that, she finds that ideals for Black femininity are indeed linked to daughter-father relationships and affected by a woman's level of exposure to expectations through her father figure. And so this is something that especially affects these women's heterosexual relationships. So the two discourses of Black femininity that she focuses on are strength and respectability. And strength and respectability form the basis of gender performance for Black women, both interracially and intraracially. They serve to prepare women to confront everyday obstacles in society. So looking at each of these individually, the notion of strength is rooted in the expectation that Black women must embody hardship, caretaking, and selflessness. Thus, Black women are often overworked and underpaid, often experiencing pressure to sacrifice their gender, to represent their race, and to work harder than the other women around them. Respectability pushes Black women to also adopt purity, submissiveness, and domesticity from white middle class women, which is a bit of the opposite of strength in some ways. And so this idea is rooted in the 19th century of middle class Black church going individuals that claim women should devote themselves to church, civic responsibility, and domesticity. Through these discourses, Black women are policed into being representatives of their race and often overlooking their genders in the process. The data and methods of research that Maria uses are again those 79 in-depth interviews with 40 Black college-educated women that are between the ages of 18 and 22. Half of the women that she interviews grew up with both biological parents around, and the other half lived with single mothers. They were from working and lower class backgrounds and were enrolled in a public university. All of the women had reported having only heterosexual relationships. In the first part of the findings, she focuses on women's identification with strength and respectability ideals. And so the study found that fathers do in fact influence how women interact with Black femininity, but this varies according to the relationship that the daughter has with her father. And so she discussed 4 categories of relationships that she noticed in the study. The first was supportive resident fathers, who were described by their daughters as engaged, accessible, responsible, and involved. One woman described her ideal Black woman as someone who is strong and can take on traditionally male roles, like being a CEO, but also maintain the roles women should, like being nurturing. Distant resident fathers lived at home but failed to interact in a meaningful way with their daughters. Supportive non-resident fathers lived in separate homes but were warm, accessible, and so on. Distant non-resident fathers lived elsewhere and had consistent contact with their daughters. So one example of a woman with distant non-resident father is that she said that Black women need to be strong to live in this world, especially in the United States. So, overall, many of these women in the study highlighted the importance of strength in addressing personal or school based struggles, although they hadn't experienced some of the workplace and family pressures that the study noted earlier. Some women were also critical of the pressure on Black women to be strong, while others associated independence with masculinity and domesticity with being ladylike or feminine. Even though respectability and strength are contradictory, most women identified both as important within the study. The second part of the findings looked at the influence of fathers on women's relationship to the respectability ideal. And so, father daughter relationships influence women's respectability narratives because the women in the study, um, in general, saw father figures as all knowing protectors, people that could give good advice on Black femininity and respectability, whether this was a reality for them or an ideal that that they wish they had in their lives. Some women in the study cited advice given by their fathers, or a lack thereof, as something that really shaped them within their heterosexual relationships. Women with supportive fathers generally cited positive influence on their ability to meet ideals of femininity and avoid toxic relationships, while women with distant fathers cited that their fathers were the kind of men that they wanted to avoid, essentially strengthening their respectability in a different way as a reaction to seeing how their fathers treated other women. Fathers are given this much influence in society in part because of the ideal of male-centered households in Black and white communities. And fathers serve the purpose of socializing their daughters to navigate their personal relationships in a respectable manner. Conclusion and response. So much of the previous research was focused on mother-daughter relationships and how they influence Black femininity amongst Black women. But this study explored the role of the father a bit further, which I thought was really interesting. The general theme was that daughters turn to fathers to help them navigate a world that's dominated by men in almost every sphere and aspect. Regardless of the presence of the father, resident or distant father, daughters form views of their own femininity and how to approach their relationships in the best way. The daughter-father relationship is just one of many institutions that reveals gendered messages about public and private spaces within which Black women are expected to behave a certain way. I thought this was a wonderful study that took some of the blame away from Black women's contradictory behavior when it came to strength and respectability, and shed light upon some of the societal organization that may account for this behavior. In that manner, it was a first step for Black women and their peers to understand themselves in the context of their environments and within their relationships. Thank you so much.